Cicero becomes consul of Rome, the top office of Rome, in 63 BC through a particularly funky alliance with Pompey, which we'll explore very, very shortly. What has happened so far in terms of the Cicero story? We know we've had the trial of Roscius in 80 BC. Cicero is then elected as quaestor for Sicily in 76 BC, and then we've had all the fun stuff with Verres. So we know that Cicero, as quaestor, gets the trust of the Sicilians. He gets asked by them to prosecute Verres, and we've got the whole trial of Verres stuff that happens in 70 BC. Following that, Cicero has a particularly awesome aedile because he gets the help from the aforementioned Sicilians to put on, be a really, really good aedile, lower the price of grain and stuff. And then he's praetor in 66 BC. Now, following this bit between 66 BC and Cicero becoming elected as consul in 63 BC, we've got some weird little stuff happening with Pompey, which we don't want to go into loads of detail here because we're focusing on Cicero as a consul, but it's worth mentioning. Remember, we've had the Lex Gabinia passed, which is Pompey against the pirates. Very controversial law that Pompey gets given a massive command, task force, huge amounts of imperium. Really controversial. He's not a consul. Cicero is totally silent. Pompey is absolutely awesome against the pirates. He's back in Rome within 3 months, and then in 66 BC there's a real push for Pompey to be given the command against Mithridates. This time Cicero makes a speech, although it's similarly controversial as the Lex Gabinia. So why the move? We're going to be looking at that sort of in another clip later on. So how does Cicero become consul in the first place? Well, obviously he's got the support of Pompey through that pro Lege Manila speech, but in order to become consul, he's got to go up against some big hitters. There's Gaius Antonius, who's a prominent patrician, but there's also Lucius Sergius Catiline, the infamous Catiline. Cicero's going to use a range of tactics to ensure that he's elected as consul, and those tactics are going to include using his good friend Atticus's connections with the patricians. His brother Quintus writes him a pamphlet where he essentially just tells him to avoid looking like a populares guy, but his main tactic is to split Catiline from his traditional supporters in the Senate, the patricians. And in order to do this, what Cicero uses is a particularly awesome speech called In Toga Candida, where he paints a picture of Catiline as a revolutionary radical, pinning the first Catilinarian conspiracy, which has nothing to do with Catiline, pinning that on Catiline. Anyway, in addition to this In Toga Candida speech, Cicero also defends the very important optimates guy called Piso, and this means that Cicero is elected as consul in 63 BC. Sut Anno is at the head of the polls. Essentially, the Senate view him, I suppose, as the best of a bad bunch. Now, in regards to what Cicero is going to do as consul, we know he's already aligned with Pompey, and he's going to protect Pompey whilst he's away in the east fighting Mithridates from Pompey's key rival Crassus and his little apprentice, so to speak, Caesar. Caesar and Crassus are going to use multiple ways to try and damage or weaken Pompey for when he gets back from the Mithridatic Wars. And the three main attacks that are launched against Pompey's position are the Rullan Bill, the Trial of Rabirius, and the attempt to aid the Egyptian pharaoh Ptolemy. Anyway, let's look at the first of those, which is the Rullan Bill. Now, the Rullan Bill is proposed by the tribune Rullus, and what it is actually not a bad idea, I suppose, is that any newly conquered land would be given to a land commission. This commission would be set up, and that new land would be given to the plebs. So far, so cool. But the commission would be 10 people. Cicero calls them the 10 kings. Now, these 10 people on this commission would have an awful lot of power in regard to distributing or redistributing any conquered land. Obviously, Crassus and Caesar would make sure that they got themselves on this land commission. What's the motive in doing this? What essentially the commission could do is when Pompey comes back from the east, having promised that land to his soldiers, they could ensure that that land does not go to Pompey's soldiers and massively embarrass Pompey. Cicero flies in like a superhero, sees that this has got some sort of political overtones, delivers the against Rullus speeches, I think there's 4 of them, and the whole measure is dropped. Sorted. So in terms of those attacks, the Rullan Bill, Cicero's protected Pompey, lovely jubbly. The second one of those is something called the Trial of Rabirius, which is a little bit on the sort of long-winded side. It all dates back to an event in 100 BC when a tribune called Saturninus makes lots of laws attacking the Senate. The Senate used their awesome power, this senatus consultum ultimum, the ultimate decree of the Senate, making it legal to kill Saturninus, which a guy called Rabirius hunts down and kills him. Rabirius is a big hero. But crucially, Rabirius has not committed a crime because he killed Saturninus, and Saturninus had an SCU against him. Fast forward 37 years later, and Caesar brings up the whole trial again. Why would he do that? Essentially, what he's trying to do here, he's not really particularly bothered about Rabirius. What he's trying to do is trying to test if the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, the SCU, is illegal. If he can show that it is illegal, because Roman law is based on precedent, on patterns and things, what he can show is he can show that Pompey, who's been the main beneficiary of special commands from the Senate, has conducted illegal warfare, and then you could put him on trial when he comes back for illegal warfare. Cicero, again, flies in like a bit of a superhero, protects Rabirius in the trial, the pro-Rabirio speech. The trial is broken up, and crucially, again, we've got another tick on there because Cicero has watched Pompey's back again. The last little example is all to do with the Egyptian King Ptolemy XII, the lute player. Rebellion in Egypt forces Ptolemy out of his throne. He goes to the only place where he can get some backup to go and get back your throne. He goes to Rome. Crassus obviously agrees to help him because of sort of, I suppose, the cash motive. And Cicero, though, sort of sees that this if Crassus goes and helps Ptolemy in Egypt, it then gives Crassus an awful lot of influence in Pompey's zone of operations. This could potentially weaken Pompey. Cicero's speech, the pro-Rege Alexandrino speech, stops Crassus being able to do that, but ironically and very, very funnily, Pompey's ally, a guy called Gabinius, actually helps Ptolemy get his little throne back later on, who will then get wound up in a trial where Cicero will sort of prosecute Gabinius. But that's a long-winded story, and there's a bit to do with Cicero's exile, so it's just there. Anyway, right. So, in terms of our attacks on Pompey, rule and build, Trial of Rabirius, the aid for Ptolemy stuff, Cicero has protected Pompey, which is awesome. So he spent his year sort of so far protecting his main political ally. Cicero needs to do something for himself, and that is conveniently there in the shape of Catiline, who we talked about right at the start. The Catilinarian conspiracy is really, really, really awesome because, is it a threat? Is it not a threat? Is Cicero a hero? Is he an opportunist? Yeah, I suppose it's all sort of wound up in the answer to these two particular questions. Is the conspiracy ever really a threat? And how does Cicero benefit from the conspiracy? Catiline had wanted to become elected using the banner of tabula nova, or the policy of tabula nova. Remember, he'd already been defeated by Cicero in those consular elections for 63 BC. So in the elections for the consul of 62 BC, Catiline is still going on with this tabula nova, this cancellation of debt policy. Now, Cicero uses his Catilinarian orations, again, to paint Catiline in the blackest of terms possible, using one of his orations to sort of reduce Catiline's supporters into 6 classes. And the important thing with this, I suppose, is number 3, the sullen veterans led by the awesomely named and rather camply named Manlius. But the important thing with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 classes, if you look at them, they're hardly the bunch that you'd need to sort of overthrow the state. What I'm trying to say is that there's no real elite political support, no equites, no army support. So it's really, has Cicero contradicted himself? It's your guess is as good as mine on that one. In terms of the story for the actual conspiracy, remember, Cicero's already elected as consul. Catiline was not elected. At the elections for the consulship of 62 BC, the year after, Cicero turns up in a breastplate showing that Catiline is a threat to him. And apparently because Catiline's now defeated for a second time in the elections, that's when he starts planning his rising and his plot. An SCU is passed against Catiline and Manlius because of Cicero's speeches. Remember, he's got no evidence other than the little informers that are Caelius and Fulvia. Then we've got this really weird sort of letter situation where Crassus gives Cicero a letter telling him of an assassination plot. Cicero then uses this letter finally as evidence to confront Catiline in the Senate, and this makes Catiline then flee Rome and join his army of sullen veterans led by the awesomely named Manlius. This is when the fun begins, because Catiline unfortunately has some of the dumbest plotters in the history of plotters left in Rome, who decide to go and get the aid of the Gallic tribe, the Allobroges. The Allobroges, though, rather than helping the plotters, inform Cicero, and Cicero gets them to go back to the plotters to write down all of their plotting to then take back to Gaul to give to their leaders. What actually they've done is they've just written down all of their evidence to get them sort of convicted of treason, I suppose. The plotters and the Allobroges are then arrested. Obviously the Allobroges are in on this all the time. The plotters are then hauled in front of the Senate. There's a debate in the Senate when, briefly, Cato wants them executed straight away. Caesar wants them imprisoned, doesn't want the death penalty. Cicero backs Cato just as it looks like the argument is going to sort of Caesar's way. And then Cicero personally escorts Catiline's plotters to the Tullianum when they're all strangled. He then sends his other consul Antonius to defeat Catiline in a battle at Pistoia, and Cicero is hailed as Pater Patriae, the father of the country. So, really, I suppose the whole Catiline thing is based around, again, these big questions. Is Catiline really a plot? Or is Cicero being an opportunist that's using a very sort of weak radical in order to get that military prestige that he would never have in order to compete against your Caesars and your Pompeys? I suppose there's also these questions as well. Obviously, we've got the whole, was Catiline a threat issue? But then the other one is, what crime had the plotters actually committed? Had they done anything, and was it right to execute them or not? Especially executing them without trial, that's really going to sort of bite Cicero on the bum later on. The important thing is obviously Cicero is given the title Pater Patriae, the father of his country for saving the state, but as we're going to know, there's going to be some longer-term implications of the Catiline plot that are not going to be as nice for Cicero.